The red warning lights flashed across the bridge of the Vorthok patrol ship, Thunderstrike. Commander Talek stood tall, his green-scaled skin gleaming under the harsh lights. His yellow eyes focused on the main screen, where a small ship drifted in space like a broken toy. "What do we have, Lieutenant Vex?" Talek asked in his deep voice. The Vorthok language sounded like stones grinding together. Lieutenant Vex, a younger Vorthok with darker scales, checked his instruments. "It appears to be a human vessel, Commander. The ship shows heavy damage. Life support is failing. We detect one life form aboard." Talek smiled, showing his sharp teeth. The Vorthok had been at war with humans for 3 years now. Every human ship they found was either destroyed or captured. This one looked like easy prey. "Prepare a boarding party," Talek ordered. "I want that human alive. Intelligence will want to question them." Within minutes, Talek led 6 Vorthok warriors through the airlock, connecting the 2 ships. Their heavy boots echoed in the damaged human vessel. The walls were blackened from fire. Broken wires hung from the ceiling like dead snakes. The air smelled of burnt metal and fear. The Vorthok moved through the ship with practiced skill. They were soldiers, trained for battle. Each one stood over 7 feet tall, with powerful muscles under their scaled skin. Their weapons were ready, but they found no resistance. In the small engine room, they discovered their prize. A human male sat calmly beside a damaged control panel. He wore a simple gray uniform with engineer markings. His black hair was messy and his clothes were dirty, but he showed no signs of panic. "You are Li Wan," Talek said, reading from a small device that translated human writing. "Ship engineer, you are now a prisoner of the Vorthok Empire." Li Wan looked up slowly. His dark eyes met Talek's without fear. This surprised the commander. Most prisoners begged or cried when captured. Some tried to fight. This human just watched them with curious eyes. "I understand," Li Wan said quietly. His voice was steady and calm. "My ship is destroyed. Nowhere to run." Talek expected a human to ask questions, to plead for mercy, to show some emotion. Instead, Li Wan simply stood up and placed his hands behind his back, ready for restraints. "Search him," Talek ordered. The warriors found no weapons on the human. Li Wan carried only basic tools and a small notebook filled with engineering drawings. One warrior grabbed the notebook, but Li Wan spoke up. "Those are just repair notes for my ship. It's nothing important now that she is destroyed." The warrior looked at the strange human symbols and handed the notebook to Talek. The commander glanced through it, saw only technical drawings that meant nothing to him. He gave it back to Li Wan. "You may keep this. It is harmless." As they led Li Wan back to their ship, Talek noticed something strange. The human's eyes moved constantly, studying everything. He looked at the walls, the equipment, the weapons, even the way the Vorthok soldiers walked. But he did it quietly, without making it obvious. Back on the Thunderstrike, they placed Li Wan in a holding cell. The cell was designed for dangerous prisoners, with thick metal walls and energy barriers. But the human seemed more interested in how the door mechanism worked than in escaping. Captain Gorvex arrived to see their prisoner. He was older than Talek, with gray streaks on his scales and scars from many battles. He looked at the small human through the cell window. "This is what we captured?" Gorvex asked. "He looks weak. Are you sure he is a real soldier?" "The ship records show he was their chief engineer," Talek replied. "Intelligence says human engineers know many military secrets." Gorvex snorted with laughter. "Look at him. He is smaller than our younglings. How can such a weak creature know anything useful?" Through the window, they watched Li Wan sitting calmly on the metal bench in his cell. He had taken out his notebook and was drawing something. His movements were precise and careful. "Set course for Cathra Prime," Gorvex ordered. "We will." Deliver this prisoner to the detention facility. Let the interrogators decide if he knows anything worth learning. As the thunderstrike jumped to faster than light speed, Li Wan continued his quiet observations. He had counted the guards, noted their shift patterns, and studied the ship's layout during his brief walk to the cell. Now he drew these details in his notebook, disguising them as random engineering sketches. The Vorthok believed they had captured a helpless enemy. Li Wan was far from helpless. He was learning. Every detail he observed went into his engineer's mind, building a picture of Vorthok technology and methods. During the 3-day journey to Cathra Prime, the guards brought him food and water twice daily. Li Wan was polite and quiet. Tina complained or caused trouble. The guards began to relax around him. They saw him as just another defeated prisoner. But Li Wan was studying them too. He learned their language by listening to their conversations. He watched how they operated their equipment. He noticed their habits and weaknesses. The guards thought they were watching him, but he was watching them more carefully. On the final day of the journey, Lieutenant Vex brought Li Wan his meal. The young Vorthok seemed curious about humans. "Why do you not try to escape?" Vex asked. "Other prisoners fight or cry. You just sit and draw." Li Wan looked up from his notebook with a small smile. "Where would I escape to? We are in deep space. It is better to accept reality and adapt to new situations." Vex found this answer strange, but logical. He left the human to his drawing and reported to Commander Talik that the prisoner remained calm and cooperative when they finally arrived at Cathra Prime. Li Wan looked out the small window of his cell. The prison world was gray and cold, covered with massive fortress structures. It looked like a place where hope went to die. But Li Wan did not feel hopeless. He felt curious. This was a new challenge, a new puzzle to solve. To Vorthok thought. They had captured him, but in truth, he had captured something far more valuable. He had captured knowledge. And for an engineer like Li Wan, knowledge was the most powerful weapon of all. As the guards prepared to transfer him to the prison, Li Wan closed his notebook and smiled. The real work was about to begin. The transport ship landed on Cathra Prime with a loud crash that shook the metal floors. Li Wan felt the vibration through his restraints as Vorthok guards prepared to move him to his new home. Through the small window, he could see the massive prison complex stretching across the gray landscape like a giant metal spider. Warden Thexus waited at the landing pad. He was older than the other Vorthok, with deep scars across his face and arms that told stories of many battles. His voice was rough, like broken glass, when he spoke to the transport guards. "Another human prisoner," Thexus said, looking at Li Wan with cold, yellow eyes. "Intelligence says this one might know useful information. Put him in Block 7, maximum security cell." The guards pushed Li Wan forward through the prison entrance. The walls were thick metal, painted dark gray. Red lights blinked along the corridors like angry eyes. The air was cold and smelled of fear and metal polish. As they walked deeper into the prison, Li Wan heard sounds from other cells. Some prisoners cried softly, others shouted in languages he did not recognize. A few made no sound at all, which somehow seemed worse than the crying. They passed several cell blocks filled with different alien species. Li Wan saw creatures with blue skin and tentacles for arms. Kanas had fur and walked on 4 legs, like animals. All of them looked broken and afraid when Vorthok guards walked by. "Your new home," said Chief Guard Bralick as they stopped at cell number 47. He was younger than Warden Thexus, but just as mean looking. "You will stay here until we decide what to do with you." The cell was small and cold. It had a metal bed, a simple toilet, and a small sink. The walls were smooth metal with no windows. A force field hummed across the entrance instead of bars. Li Wan stepped inside and heard the energy barrier activate behind him. "Food comes twice a day," Braylock explained through the barrier. Exercise time is 1 hour every 3 days. Follow the rules and you will not have problems. Break the rules and you'll wish you had never been born. After the guards left, Li Wan sat on the hard bed and looked around his new home. The cell was designed to break spirits, but his engineer mind immediately began studying how everything worked. The force field, the air system, the lights. Everything had weaknesses if you knew where to look. The next morning, a guard brought breakfast. It was gray paste that tasted like nothing, but Li Wan ate it without complaining. He had learned long ago that staying healthy was more important than having good food. During his first exercise period, Li Wan walked in a small yard with other prisoners. Most aliens stayed away from each other, too scared or proud to make friends. But Li Wan noticed another human in the group. The other human was older, with gray hair and tired eyes. He wore the same gray prison clothes as everyone else. When their eyes met, both men nodded slightly, but said nothing. The Vorthok guards watched everything, and it was dangerous to talk too much. Later that day, the older human was placed in the cell next to Li Wan. Through the thin walls, they could whisper quietly without the guards hearing. "I am Park Min-ho," the older man said softly. "Former ship captain. Been here 8 months now." Li Wan, engineer. Just arrived yesterday. "Good to hear Korean again," Park Min-ho whispered. "I was starting to forget the sound of our language." Over the next few days, the two humans learned to communicate through small signals and whispered conversations. Park Min-ho told Li Wan about life in the prison, which guards were mean and which ones might be reasonable, when food came and when inspections happened, how to avoid making the Vorthok angry. "The key is to seem weak and broken," Park Min-ho explained during one quiet talk. "Expect prisoners to be afraid. If you act too confident, they will punish you." But Li Wan noticed that Park Min-ho was not really broken at all. The older man's eyes were still sharp and intelligent. He watched the guards carefully and remembered everything. It's like Li Wan did. Chief Guard Braylock seemed especially interested in the two humans. He would stop by their cells and stare at them through the force fields. Li Wan could tell the Vorthok was trying to understand something about humans that confused him. "You are different from other prisoners," Braylock said one day to Li Wan. "The others beg or cry or get angry. You just watch and think. Why?" Li Wan looked up from his notebook where he had been drawing what looked like random patterns. "There is no point in being angry about things I cannot change. Better to accept the situation and learn from it." This answer seemed to puzzle Braylock even more. He walked away, shaking his scaled head. What Braylock did not know was that Li Wan's random patterns were actually detailed maps of the prison layout. Every corridor, every guard post, every camera location. He drew them to look like engineering sketches, but they were really intelligence reports. Park Min-ho was doing the same thing in his own way. During his months in prison, he had learned the schedules of every guard, the weaknesses in the security system, and the daily routines that kept the prison running. After 2 weeks, something interesting happened. The prison's water recycling system broke down. The Vorthok engineers worked for hours trying to fix it, but they could not solve the problem. Without clean water, the entire prison would become dangerous within days. Li Wan could hear the engineers talking in the corridor outside his cell. They were frustrated and worried. The system was more complex than they understood, and their repair attempts only made things worse. "The filtration matrix is overloading," Li Wan said quietly to himself, but loud enough for the guards to hear. He had been listening to the problem, and his engineer mind automatically understood the solution. "Guard." Braylock heard him speak and stopped at his cell. "What did you say, human?" "Nothing important," Li Wan replied. "Just thinking about the water problem. Sounds like a filtration matrix overload." Common problem with that type of recycling system. Brarlock stared at him with suspicious eyes. How do you know about our water system? Li Wan shrugged. All recycling systems work on similar principles. The symptoms you described are typical of matrix overload. Usually happens when the cleaning cycles get out of balance. For a moment, Braylock said nothing. Then he walked away quickly. Li Wan could hear him talking to other guards in excited whispers. Later that evening, Warden Thexus himself came to Li Wan's cell. The old Vorthok looked tired and worried. My engineers tell me you might know something about water recycling systems, Thexus said. I know about many types of systems, Li Wan replied carefully. It is what engineers do. Thexus was quiet for a long time, thinking. The prison needed water, and his own engineers were failing. Finally, he made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Tomorrow, you'll look at our system. If you can help fix it, there might be better food for you. As the warden walked away, Li Wan allowed himself a small smile. The Vorthok were about to learn their first lesson about human capabilities. And Li Wan was about to get his first real look at the prison's critical systems. The game was beginning to change. The next morning, 4 guards escorted Li Wan through corridors he had never seen before. His hands were bound with energy cuffs, but his eyes were free to observe everything. The deeper sections of the prison were more complex than he had imagined. Control rooms, maintenance areas, and technical facilities stretched in all directions. They stopped at a heavy door, marked with Vorthok symbols. Inside was a large room filled with pipes, tanks, and humming machinery. The water recycling system was the heart that kept the entire prison alive. And right now, that heart was sick. Chief Engineer Krex stood beside a control panel, scaled hands moving frantically over buttons and switches. He was older than most Vorthok, with gray scales and thick glasses over his yellow eyes. Sweat dripped from his forehead as he tried to understand why his machines were failing. This is the human who claims to know about our systems, Guard Brarlock announced. Krex looked up with tired, desperate eyes. Can you really help? Or are you just making false promises? Li Wan studied the room for a moment. The layout was different from human designs, but the basic principles were the same. Water came in dirty, got cleaned through several stages, and came out pure. Simple in theory, but complex in practice. I need to see the filtration matrix readings first, Li Wan said calmly. Krex hesitated, then activated a display screen. Numbers and graphs showed the system's current status. Li Wan read the alien symbols slowly, using the mathematical knowledge that was universal across all species. Your cleaning cycles are running at different speeds, Li Wan explained after studying the data. The biological filters are working faster than the chemical filters. This creates a backup that overloads the matrix. Krex stared at him in surprise. How can you read our technical displays? You are not Vorthok. Mathematics is the same everywhere, Li Wan replied. Water pressure, flow rates, chemical reactions. These followed natural laws that do not change based on who built the machines. For the next hour, Li Wan walked around the system with Krex and the guards. He asked questions about how each part worked and why certain decisions were made in the design. The Vorthok engineer found himself explaining complex technical details to his prisoner. The problem is here, Li Wan said, pointing to a junction where 3 large pipes met. Your flow controller is set wrong. It is trying to push too much water through the biological stage before the chemical stage is ready. Krex checked his instruments and realized the human was right. The readings clearly showed the imbalance, but none of the Vorthok technicians had noticed it. They had been so focused on individual parts that they missed the bigger picture. Okay. We adjust the controller. Will this fix the problem? Krex asked. It should balance the system. Li Wan nodded. Okay. But you also need to clean the backup sensors. Okay. They are giving false readings that confuse the automatic controls. Working together, they made the adjustments Li Wan suggested. Within minutes, the system began running smoothly again. The warning lights stopped flashing. The pressure readings returned to normal. Clean water flowed through the prison pipes once more. Krex stared at his instruments in amazement. It works. The efficiency is actually better than before. How did you know what to do? I listened to the problem and thought about the solution, Li Wan said simply. Every system tells you what is wrong if you know how to listen. Word of the human success spread quickly through the prison staff. Guards whispered to each other about the prisoner who fixed what their own engineers could not. Some were impressed, others were suspicious. All were confused. 3 days later, Intelligence Officer Zeltran arrived to interrogate Li Wan. Zeltran was different from the other Vorthok. He was smaller and thinner, with sharp features and cold, calculating eyes. His job was to extract secrets from prisoners through questioning and psychological pressure. They brought Li Wan to a bare interrogation room with only a table and 2 chairs. Zeltran sat across from him with a datapad full of questions about human military technology and ship designs. You will tell me about human defensive systems, Zeltran began in a threatening voice. We know you worked on military vessels before. Your capture. Li Wan looked at him calmly. I was a civilian engineer. I repaired cargo ships and transport vessels. Nothing military. Do not lie to me, Zeltran snapped. Your ship had defensive capabilities. You must know how they work. Basic defensive systems are not military secrets, Li Wan replied. They work on the same principles as any energy barrier, okay? Like the force fields you use in your prison cells. Zeltran leaned forward with interest. Explain these principles. Wan began describing energy field technology in simple terms, but as he talked, he started asking his own questions. How much power did Vorthok force fields use? What frequency ranges were they tuned to? How did they handle energy feedback? Zeltran found himself answering before he realized what was happening. The human's questions seemed innocent enough, just technical curiosity. But each answer led to another question, and soon Zeltran was revealing details about Vorthok security systems that should have remained classified. Your containment fields are very efficient, Li Wan said, with genuine admiration. The power management system must be quite advanced to maintain so many barriers simultaneously. Yes, our engineers designed a centralized power grid that can adjust automatically, Zeltran replied proudly, then stopped. He had just revealed important information about the prison's security systems to a prisoner. Li Wan continued asking technical questions that seemed harmless, but were actually gathering intelligence about Vorthok capabilities and weaknesses. Zeltran, proud of his species' technological achievements, kept answering without thinking about the security implications. After 2 hours of interrogation, Zeltran had learned almost nothing about human military secrets. But Li Wan had learned detailed information about Vorthok prison security, carol systems, and defensive capabilities. The next day brought another crisis. The prison's main environmental control system began malfunctioning. Temperature controls failed in several cell blocks. Air circulation pumps started overheating. The backup systems could not handle the full load. Warden Thexus faced a serious problem. If the environmental systems failed completely, hundreds of prisoners could die from heat stroke or oxygen deprivation. His maintenance crews were working frantically, but they could not identify the source of the cascading failures. Chief Engineer Krex remembered the human who had fixed the water system. Warden, perhaps the human prisoner could help again. He understood our recycling system better than our own technicians. Thexus hesitated. Using a prisoner as a technical consultant was against all protocols. But lives were at stake, and his own engineers were failing. Bring him to the Environmental Control Center, Thexus ordered. When Li Wan arrived at the control center, he found chaos. Technicians ran between control panels, trying different solutions without success. Alarms rang constantly. Display screens showed critical failures spreading throughout the system. Lee Wand studied the main control display for several minutes. The Warthog had built a complex system with many interconnected parts. When one section failed, it created stress on other sections, causing a chain reaction of breakdowns. The problem is not any single component, Lee Wan explained to the gathered technicians. Your system is designed with too many dependencies. When the primary cooling system overloaded, it triggered automatic shutdowns in systems that should have stayed online. Chief Krex looked at the diagnostic displays with new understanding. You mean the safety protocols are causing the failures? Okay, the safety protocols are working exactly as designed, Lee Wan replied. But they were designed for smaller, simpler systems. As your prison grew larger, the safety systems became too sensitive. Now they shut down essential systems to protect non-essential ones. Working with the Vorthok technicians, Lee Wan identified which safety protocols needed to be adjusted and which backup systems could handle more load. Within 3 hours, the environmental controls were stable again. But more importantly, something had changed in how the Vorthok staff looked at their human prisoner. They had watched him solve complex problems that their own experts could not handle. They had seen him work cooperatively with their technicians, sharing knowledge freely. Warden Thexus stood in his office later that evening, reading reports about the day's events. His prisoner had saved the prison twice now. The human showed technical knowledge that exceeded many Vorthok engineers. For the first time since the war began, Thexus wondered if they had been wrong about human capabilities. Maybe these small, seemingly weak creatures were more dangerous than anyone had realized. Not because they were strong fighters, but because they were brilliant problem solvers in his cell that night. Lee Wan whispered to Park Min-ho through the wall about the day's events. Both men understood that the balance of power was beginning to shift. The Vorthok was starting to depend on human expertise. They are learning to respect our abilities, Park Min-ho whispered back. But they do not yet understand what that means. Lee Hwan smiled in the darkness. Damn, the Vorthok thought they were using him to solve their problems. K did not realize that he was using their problems to gain access to their most critical systems. Every repair he made taught him more about Vorthok Technola. Part 4. The shift 2 weeks after the environmental crisis. Commander Talek returned to Cathra Prime for his regular inspection of high-value prisoners. He expected to find Lee Wan broken and ready to reveal military secrets. Instead, he found something that shocked him completely. As Talek walked through the prison corridors, Teen noticed Vorthok technicians discussing complex problems with unusual excitement. Guards mentioned the human prisoner with respect rather than contempt. Even Warden Thexus seemed less stressed than during previous visits. I want to see the human engineer, Talek told Chief Guard Bralak. He is currently in Engineering Section C, Bralak replied. Should I have him brought to his cell? Talek paused. Currently in Engineering Section C. Why is a maximum security prisoner in a restricted area? Bralak looked uncomfortable. The warden authorized it. We had another system failure, and the human was helping with repairs. This was highly irregular. Maximum security prisoners did not wander around technical areas helping with repairs. Talek decided to see this situation for himself. He found Lee Wan in a large workshop, working alongside Chief Engineer Krex and 3 Vorthok technicians. The human was not restrained. He moved freely around the room, examining equipment and making suggestions. The Vorthok listened to his ideas with careful attention. What is the meaning of this? Talek demanded as he entered the workshop. Everyone stopped working and turned toward the commander. The Vorthok technicians immediately stood at attention, but Lee Wan simply looked up from the device he was examining. Commander Talek, Warden Thexus said, entering the room behind him. I was about to send you a report about recent developments. Developments. Talik's voice was sharp with anger. I see a prisoner working without restraints in a secure facility. Violates every protocol we have. Krex stepped forward nervously. Commander, this human has solved problems that we could not fix for months. The power distribution system, the waste processing units, even the communication array. He has improved efficiency throughout the entire facility. Talik stared at Li Wan, who continued working calmly, as if armed Vorthok commanders appeared in his workshop every day. Is this true? You have been repairing our systems? I have been helping where I can, Li Wan replied without looking up. Engineering problems are interesting puzzles. Hey, it does not matter who built the machines, okay? The physics are always the same, and you do this willingly, without being forced. Li Wan finally looked at Talik directly. Being useful is better than sitting in a cell, doing nothing. Your people have treated me fairly while I work. Why would I refuse to help solve interesting problems? This answer confused Talik more than any interrogation report. Prisoners were supposed to resist their captors, not cooperate enthusiastically. He had expected to find a broken human, ready to beg for mercy. Instead, he found someone who seemed more like a valued consultant than a prisoner. Over the next few days, Talik observed the daily operations of the prison. What he saw disturbed him deeply. Vorthok staff regularly asked Li Wan for advice on technical problems. The human moved through restricted areas with minimal supervision. Guards treated him with polite respect rather than harsh authority. Even more troubling, Li Wan had begun working with Park Min-ho on larger projects. The two humans collaborated on complex repairs that required multiple specialists. They divided problems between them based on their different areas of expertise. Humans worked together very effectively. Chief Engineer Krex explained to Talik during one observation session. They communicate in ways that make difficult projects much easier. Park Min-ho understands systems integration, while Li Wan specializes in component-level repairs. Talik watched the two humans directing a team of Vorthok technicians in the replacement of a major power coupling. The aliens followed human instructions without question, trusting their expertise completely. Who is in charge of this repair project? Talik asked. Krex looked confused by the question. Li Wan designed to repair a procedure. Park Min-ho coordinated the work schedule. They are in charge, I suppose. This was exactly what Talik feared. Most, the prisoners, have become leaders, and their guards have become followers. The normal order of a prison had been completely reversed. That evening, Talik called for a private meeting with Warden Thexus. They sat in the warden's office, discussing the unusual situation that had developed over the past month. These humans are dangerous, Talik said bluntly. Not because they try to escape or cause violence. They are dangerous because they make themselves indispensable. Thexus nodded slowly. I have been thinking the same thing. At first, I was grateful for their help. The technical problems they solved saved us time and resources. But now I realize that we have become dependent on their expertise. What happens if we remove them from these technical duties? Several critical systems will likely fail within days, Thexus admitted. My engineers have become used to consulting with the humans on every major problem. They have lost confidence in their own abilities. Pleek stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the prison complex. Okay, this is how humans fight their wars. Okay, not with weapons and violence, but with intelligence and manipulation. They make their enemies need them. Before Thexus could reply, an alarm began sounding throughout the facility. Red lights flashed in the corridors. An automated voice announced a critical failure in the main power grid. Within minutes, Chief Engineer Krex burst into the warden's office. Sir, we have a cascade failure in the primary power distribution system. Multiple substations are offline. Emergency power will not last more than 6 hours. Thexus and Talik rushed to the main control center. Dozens of technicians worked frantically at control panels, but the situation was getting worse instead of better. System after system went offline as the power failure spread through the facility. "Where are the human prisoners?" Thexus asked. "In their cells, sir. Should we bring them here?" Talik wanted to say no. He wanted to prove that Vorthok engineers could solve their own problems without human help. But as he watched the cascade failure spreading, he realized that pride was a luxury they could not afford. "Bring them both," he ordered reluctantly. Lee Wan and Park Min-ho arrived under guard, but without restraints. They quickly assessed the situation by studying multiple display screens showing the power grid status. "The main distribution hub has overloaded," Park Min-ho explained after a few minutes of analysis. When it failed, all secondary hubs tried to compensate by carrying extra load. Now they are failing too. "Can it be repaired?" Thexus asked. "Not quickly enough," Lee Wan replied. "But we can reroute power through the auxiliary systems if we bypass the damaged sections." "How long will that take?" Park Min-ho and Lee Wan looked at each other, communicating through subtle expressions that the Vorthok could not interpret. "Working together with your technicians, about 4 hours," Park Min-ho said. "But we will need complete access to all power control systems, okay? And we will need your people to follow our instructions exactly, without questioning or delays." Kalek realized what was happening. The humans were negotiating, okay? They were not just offering to help. They were demanding to be put in complete charge of the repair operation. "You are prisoners," Talik said firmly. "You do not make demands." Lee Wan looked at him calmly. "You are correct. We are prisoners. We can return to our cells and let your engineers handle this problem themselves." The room fell silent, except for the sound of more systems failing. Every minute of delay meant more damage to the power grid. Soon, life support systems would begin shutting down. Warden Thexus looked at Commander Talik, then at his frantically working technicians who were making no progress. Finally, he made the decision that changed everything. "You have complete authority over this repair operation," he told the two humans. "All technicians will follow your instructions." Lee Wan and Park Min-ho immediately began giving orders. Sent teams to different sections of the facility, assigned specific tasks to individual technicians, coordinated multiple repair efforts simultaneously. The Vorthok staff responded with impressive efficiency. They trusted human judgment completely and worked harder than Talik had ever seen them work before. As the hours passed, Talik watched something remarkable happen. The humans did not just direct the repair work, they taught the Vorthok technicians better methods for diagnosing problems and implementing solutions. They shared knowledge freely, making their alien colleagues more capable. When the main power grid came back online after 3.5 hours, every Vorthok in the control center cheered. They had accomplished something that seemed impossible, and they had done it by following human leadership. But Talik did not cheer. He understood that something fundamental had changed. The humans were no longer prisoners who helped with technical problems. They had become leaders that the Vorthok staff looked to for guidance and solutions. The shift in power was complete. The question now was, what would happen when higher authorities learned that a Vorthok prison was being run by human prisoners? 3 days after the power grid crisis, General Morgoth arrived at Kethra Prime without warning. His massive battlecruiser landed at the main spaceport like a metal mountain descending from the sky. The general was legendary among the Vorthok military, known for his brilliant strategies and fierce dedication to the Empire. Morgoth was older than most active commanders, with battle scars covering his dark green scales. His yellow eyes had seen countless wars, and his deep voice commanded respect from every soldier who heard it. When he walked, other Vorthok stepped aside automatically. He had come to investigate disturbing reports about the prison facility. High Command had received intelligence suggesting that human prisoners were being given unprecedented access to critical systems. Some reports even claimed that Vorthok personnel were taking orders from their captives. This is either gross incompetence or treason, Morgoth had told his staff before departing. I will determine which and deal with it accordingly. Warden Thaxis and Commander Talek waited nervously in the main conference room as the general toured the facility. They could hear his heavy footsteps echoing through the corridors as he inspected various sections of the prison. After 2 hours, Morgoth returned to the conference room with a grim expression. He sat down heavily in the large chair at the head of the table and stared at the two officers with cold, calculating eyes. Explain to me how prisoners are wandering freely through secure areas, Morgoth said in a voice like grinding stone. Explain to me why guards refer to inmates as consultants and advisors. Warden Thexus spoke first, his voice trembling slightly. General, the human prisoners have demonstrated exceptional technical abilities. They have solved critical problems that our own engineers could not handle. Problems that would not exist if your facility was properly maintained, Morgoth replied sharply. Are you telling me that the Vorthok Empire cannot operate a prison without help from human captives? Commander Talek leaned forward. General, I initially shared your concerns about these irregular procedures, but I have observed the humans' capabilities firsthand. Their knowledge exceeds our own in several technical areas. Morgoth's eyes narrowed dangerously. Are you suggesting that humans are superior to Vorthok in any way? Before either officer could answer, Chief Engineer Krex burst into the room. His scales were pale with panic, and sweat dripped from his forehead. General, we have a massive system failure in the primary life support network, Krex announced breathlessly. Multiple cascade failures across all levels. Emergency backup systems are failing one by one. Morgoth stood up quickly. How long before life support is completely compromised? Current failure rates, less than 4 hours, Krex replied. We have teams working on repairs, but the problems are spreading faster than we can fix them. What is causing these failures? Krex looked uncomfortable. The systems are interconnected in ways that our current staff does not fully understand. When one component fails, it creates stress patterns that cause other components to fail. We cannot predict which systems will fail. Next, Morgoth turned to Warden Thexus with fury in his eyes. Your facility is falling apart, and you have been relying on prisoners to keep it running. This is a disgrace to the Vorthok military, General Talek said carefully. The human prisoners have successfully resolved similar crises in the past. They understand system integration better than our engineers. I will not authorize the use of enemy prisoners to save this facility, Morgoth declared. Our own people will solve this problem, or we will evacuate the prison and accept the loss. As if summoned by his words, another alarm began sounding. The lights flickered and dimmed. Ventilation fans slowed to a stop, then restarted with irregular rhythms. The smell of overheated electronics began drifting through the air vents. Emergency reports flooded in from all sections of the prison. Atmospheric processors were overloading. Temperature controls had failed in half the cell blocks. The main computer systems were experiencing random shutdowns and restarts. Morgoth watched his officers struggle with the cascading crisis for 30 minutes. Vorthok technicians ran frantically between control stations, implementing desperate repair attempts that only seemed to make things worse. The general realized that his people were completely overwhelmed by the complexity of the problems. Where are the human prisoners now? Morgoth asked reluctantly. In their cells, sir, Warden Thaxus replied. Okay. We confined them when the crisis began, following standard security protocols. Bring them to the main control center, Morgoth ordered. I want to see these supposedly superior human abilities for myself. Li Wan and Park Min-ho arrived under heavy guard, wearing standard prisoner restraints. They looked around the chaotic Control center with calm, analytical eyes. Dozens of Warthog technicians worked frantically at control panels, while alarm klaxons wailed constantly. You have cascading system failures, Park Min-ho observed after studying the main display screens. Your emergency protocols are causing more damage than the original problems. General Morgoth stepped forward, towering over the two humans. You will address me as General Prisoner, and you will show proper respect when speaking. Li Wan looked up at the imposing Vorthok commander without fear. General, with respect. Your facility will be uninhabitable within 3 hours unless someone takes immediate action to stabilize the life support systems. My engineers are taking action, Morgoth replied coldly. Your engineers are following emergency procedures designed for simple, isolated failures, Park Min-ho explained. These procedures make complex, interconnected failures much worse. Every safety shutdown creates additional stress on other systems. Agatha watched his technicians work for another few minutes. Despite their desperate efforts, more systems failed with each passing moment. The cascade was accelerating beyond their ability to control. What would you do differently? Morgoth asked the humans, his voice still hostile, but tinged with reluctant curiosity. Li Wan and Park Min-ho exchanged a quick glance. They had been waiting for this moment, when Vordak pride would finally yield to practical necessity. We would need complete control of all repair operations, Li Wan said. No interference from existing command structures, no questioning of our methods, and no restrictions on which systems we can access. You are prisoners demanding to run my facility, Morgoth said incredulously. We are engineers offering to save your facility, Park Min-ho corrected. The choice is yours to make. Morgoth looked around the control center at his failing equipment and panicking staff. Pride warred with pragmatism in his military mind. Every instinct told him to reject help from enemy prisoners. But his responsibility was to preserve Vorthok lives and resources. If I grant you this authority, what guarantee do I have that you will not sabotage our systems? Li Wan smiled slightly. Hey, General, we have been living in this facility for months. If we wanted to sabotage your systems, we could have done so at any time. Instead, we have consistently improved their efficiency and reliability. Another wave of system failures swept through the facility. Life support indicators dropped into critical ranges. Emergency lighting activated as main power systems began shutting down automatically. General Morgoth made the hardest decision of his military career. You have complete authority over this crisis, he told the two humans. All personnel will follow your directions without question. The transformation was immediate and dramatic. Li Wan and Park Min-ho began issuing rapid, precise orders to the Vorthok technicians. They divided the massive facility into manageable sectors and assigned specific teams to each area. Instead of fighting the cascade failure, they worked with it, redirecting its energy into controlled channels. Shut down life support in the empty cell blocks, Park Min-ho ordered. Redirect that power to the critical systems in occupied areas. Bypass the main atmospheric processor, Li Wan instructed another team. Route air circulation through the backup system until we can rebuild the primary controls. The Vordak staff responded with impressive speed and coordination. They had been trained to follow orders without question, and they applied that training to human leadership as naturally as they had followed Vorthok commanders. General Morgoth watched in amazement as the two humans orchestrated a complex repair operation involving hundreds of technicians across the entire facility. They seemed to understand not just the technical aspects of each system, but also how to manage people and resources effectively. How did they know our systems so well? Morgoth asked Warden Thexus quietly. They have been studying and improving our technology for months, Thexus replied. Every repair they made taught them more about our capabilities and design philosophies. As the hours passed, the cascade failure was gradually brought under control. The humans did not just stop the crisis. They fundamentally redesigned how the systems interacted with each other. They eliminated many of the dependencies that had made the facility vulnerable to cascade failures in the first place. Life support is stabilized across all sectors, Park Min-ho reported after 6 hours of intensive work. Atmospheric processing is running at 115% of normal efficiency. Power distribution is optimized and redundant. Lee Wan added, "The facility can now survive multiple system fires.